In the autumn of 2025, the remnants of a dying typhoon swept across the southwest coast of Alaska. In the village of Quinhagak, the storm tore more than 60 feet of shoreline into the sea in a matter of hours. What went with it was not just sand and grass, it was history. Somewhere between 100,000 carved masks, tools, and toys, preserved for centuries beneath frozen ground, scattered across the beach, and vanished into the frigid water. For most of human history, the Arctic did something no other place on Earth could do. It remembered. Permafrost, ground that has stayed frozen for thousands of years, locked wood, bone, and hide in a kind of perfect stillness, holding them exactly as they were left. But that freezer is switching off. As the ground thaws and the coastline crumbles, the very force that preserved the far north's oldest secrets is now the same force erasing them, sometimes faster than anyone can carry them to safety. This is the story of what is being found and what is already being lost in the melting edge of Alaska. To understand what is being lost, you first have to understand what permafrost actually does. It is not simply cold ground. It is ground that has remained frozen continuously for at least 2 years, and in much of Alaska's north, that freeze has held unbroken for thousands of years. Inside that frozen shell, the ordinary forces that destroy organic material, bacteria, oxygen, moisture, simply stop working. Wood does not rot, hide does not decompose, bone does not crumble. A bone pulled from Alaskan permafrost that is 1,000 years old can look, in the words of archaeologist Ann Jensen, like the animal died only a few years ago. This is why Arctic sites are treasured so deeply by archaeologists. In most of the world, a dig might turn up a scatter of stone tools and little else. Everything organic long since gone. In the permafrost, an entire material culture survives intact. Carved wooden dolls still holding their original paint. Grass woven into baskets, still green beneath the mud. Sealskin and sinew, tools of bone and antler, all locked in place exactly as their makers left them. Even DNA can survive inside this frozen tissue, preserved well enough to reconstruct ancient diets and the food webs that sustained entire communities. It is, in a very real sense, a library. One written not in words, but in objects. Each one a sentence in the story of how people survived in one of the harshest environments on the planet. But a library built on ice has a fatal vulnerability. The moment the freezer fails, the clock that had been paused for centuries starts running again, all at once, and it runs fast. Wood that survived 1,000 winters can rot to mush in a single thawed summer. That fragile balance, frozen for millennia, undisturbed for generations, is the exact balance now being broken across the Alaskan Arctic. And nowhere has that broken balance been more dramatically revealed than in a small village on the Bering Sea coast called Quinhagak. Quinhagak is a small Yupik community on Alaska's southwest coast, and just outside it lies a site called Nunalleq. In 2009, archaeologists began digging there and hit frozen soil only about 18 inches below the surface. What they found beneath it would become one of the richest troves of pre-contact indigenous material culture ever recovered in North America. The site preserved the remains of a village roughly 700 years old, one that had met a violent end in a deadly raid centuries before European contact, then lay sealed and undisturbed beneath the tundra ever since. Led by archaeologist Rick Knecht, the excavation team began pulling artifacts from the mud that looked less like ancient relics and more like objects someone had set down yesterday. Wooden dolls emerged, still carrying traces of their original paint. Ceremonial masks surfaced with carved faces of legendary sea creatures, meant to be worn in dances now generations gone. Woven grass baskets and mats still held the twist and pattern their makers had given them by hand. Break open one of the muddy, fibrous bundles pulled from the ground, and inside you would find blades of grass still green, cut, as Knecht once marveled, when Shakespeare walked the earth. Leather, fur, ivory, tattoo needles, carved kayak fittings, a belt strung with caribou teeth, thousands of everyday objects and extraordinary ones alike, all pulled from a single patch of thawing coastline. For Yupik descendants, Nunalleq is not simply a scientific curiosity. It is a direct, physical connection to ancestors whose daily lives had otherwise gone unrecorded, preserved by the very ground that people once worried might keep such things hidden forever. But the same thaw that had begun exposing this village was already quietly working against it, softening the frozen shield that had protected it for 7 centuries, and setting up a race against time that archaeologists are still running today. Over more than a decade of excavation, the scale of what emerged from Nunalleq became almost impossible to comprehend. Archaeologists have pulled roughly 100,000 individual artifacts from that single stretch of Alaskan coastline, an almost unheard-of density of preserved material culture from any pre-contact North American site. Among them are objects of startling craftsmanship. Wooden masks carved with the exaggerated, expressive faces used in Yupik ceremonial dances, some representing the sea monsters and spirits woven through generations of oral tradition. Finely made kayak parts, shaped and fitted with a precision that reflects lives depending entirely on getting the engineering right. Ivory tools built for tattooing, hinting at body art traditions rarely visible in the archaeological record anywhere else in the world. And ordinary things too. The eating utensils, the fish hooks, the woven mats, the objects that reveal not the extraordinary, but the daily, the texture of what it actually felt like to live in this place 700 years ago. What makes Nunalleq extraordinary is not any single object. It is the completeness of the picture. Most archaeological sites offer fragments, a tool here, a bone there, and researchers spend careers stitching together inference from scraps. Nunalleq instead offers something closer to a freeze frame of an entire community. Its tools, its art, its food, its beliefs, preserved together in one place. That completeness is exactly why its loss would be so devastating. It is not that any one carved mask or ivory needle is irreplaceable in isolation. It is that the whole, assembled picture, the relationships between objects, the story they tell only when read together, cannot be reassembled once scattered. And in October of 2025, that is almost exactly what began to happen, when a storm arrived that even seasoned Arctic archaeologists had not fully prepared for. In mid-October of 2025, the remnants of former Typhoon Halong slammed into Alaska's southwestern coastline. Villages further west bore the worst of the widespread devastation, but Quinhagak did not escape unscathed. The fierce winds and surging seas delivered a catastrophic blow to something far older than any building in town. In a matter of hours, the storm consumed more than 60 feet of shoreline at the Nunalleq site, tearing directly into deposits that had taken archaeologists more than a decade to carefully expose. The damage was staggering in scale. Researchers estimate that as many as 100,000 irreplaceable Yupik artifacts, an amount comparable to everything painstakingly recovered over the entire life of the excavation, were scattered across miles of beach or swept into the frigid waters of the Bering Sea. It stands as one of the most significant single losses in the history of Arctic archaeology, a blow to our understanding of pre-contact indigenous life that cannot simply be redug. Lead archaeologist Rick Knecht and his team have tried to find what optimism they can in the wreckage. The storm's violence, while devastating, also tore open new layers of the site that had been deliberately left untouched. Sections researchers had deprioritized for later excavation while focusing on the areas most immediately threatened by erosion. There was a big chunk where the team had only gone about halfway down, Knecht explained, and had left for later. Now nature has forced their hand. But the deeper truth is one the whole region is grappling with. A 2024 report from the Alaska Native Tribal Health Consortium had already warned that thawing permafrost was undermining buildings throughout Quinhagak itself, threatening homes, sewage systems, and fishing camps, alongside the archaeological record. The storm was not an isolated disaster. It was a preview of what a warming Arctic coastline has in store, and Nunalleq would not be the last site to feel it. Roughly 700 miles north of Quinhagak, on Alaska's north slope near Utqiagvik, lies a site called Walakpa. To archaeologists and to the local Inupiat community alike, it is considered one of the most important places on the entire Arctic coast. Walakpa, or Nunalleq in Inupiaq, is a multi-component site built from a series of mounds and layered deposits reaching back at least 1,200 years, and by some estimates as far as 4,500. Its layers capture a major transition in Arctic history, the migration and evolution of the Bernurk and Thule cultures, ancestors of the modern Inupiat people. When researchers first excavated Nunalleq in the 1960s, they uncovered a rich and remarkably well-preserved record of ancient Arctic life. That early work only scratched the surface, and for decades, the site sat largely undisturbed, its deeper layers presumed safe under a blanket of permafrost that had held for millennia. Then, starting around 2013, that assumption began to collapse. Archaeologist Ann Jensen of the Quinhagak Inupiat Corporation has led recovery efforts at Nunalleq since that year, watching a site once defined by stability turn into one defined by emergency. Reduced sea ice has stopped shielding the coastline from storm waves the way it once did. Storms hit more often and hit harder. And underneath it all, the permafrost itself is thawing, so the ground can no longer hold its shape against the sea. Jensen and her colleagues have recovered abundant organic material from the site, ancient animal bones, wooden and bone tools, plant remains, all preserved with the same startling clarity found at Nunalleq. But every excavation season now doubles as triage. What used to be slow, careful, methodical fieldwork has become a race to document and remove what can be saved before the next storm decides the question for good. For years, that race went reasonably well. Then, in the fall of 2014, a single storm redrew the terms of the fight entirely. In one event, at least 14 more meters of the Nunalleq site were torn away and lost to the sea. That is not a slow, manageable erosion of a few inches a year. That is a decade or more of expected loss, compressed into a single afternoon. The storm did not just erase potential future discoveries. It tore into ground archaeologists had already worked. At least 30% of the area excavated back in the 1960s, along with a house structure that Jensen's team had identified only the year before, was lost outright. And the storm surge did something else, something that turns abstract scientific loss into something starkly human. It exposed human remains, ancestors of the Inupiat community, wrenched loose from ground that had held them respectfully and undisturbed for centuries. Since then, the numbers at Nunalleq have only grown starker. Jensen has documented roughly 39 feet of the site disappearing into the ocean during her years working there, a rate of destruction that outpaces almost any realistic excavation budget or timeline. Saving the site properly, by her own estimate, would require months of encampment, dedicated freezer storage for delicate organics, and specialized soil engineering, resources far beyond what current funding provides. Instead, her seasons at Nunalleq have often been what she calls Hail Mary digs, short, shoestring efforts to document and rescue whatever can be reached before the sea claims it. It is not the archaeology anyone would choose to practice. It is the archaeology the climate has forced on them. And Nunalleq is only one site among many facing the exact same clock. Before I show you the last part, if you want to look at your own results and see where Alaska's frozen past fits into your bloodline, I put a full 3-volume PDF bundle over at the OriginDNA website. It shows you how to read your raw data and find matches beyond what Ancestry or 23andMe tell you. Link is in the description, but stay right here, because what comes next is the part most people completely miss. While storms tear at Alaska's coastline, a quieter kind of thaw is happening inland, high in the mountains, and it is turning up discoveries of its own. In the Brooks Range, Alaska's northernmost mountain chain, a Swiss archaeologist named Noah Sturi has spent recent field seasons chasing a very specific kind of melting ice. Not glaciers, which grind and move and destroy whatever they carry, but ice patches, smaller bodies of frozen snow that form at high altitude and simply sit still, year after year, century after century. That stillness makes ice patches remarkably good at preserving whatever lands on them. Unlike a glacier's slow, crushing churn, an ice patch can hold an object gently in place for centuries or longer. The famous case that put this kind of archaeology on the map was Otzi the Iceman, a 5,000-year-old body found frozen in just this kind of unmoving ice in the Alps back in 1991. Sturry and his colleagues traveled to Alaska's Atagun River drainage in the Brooks Range, knowing that ice patches like these often attract more than just curious researchers. Caribou seek them out too, retreating to the cold, wind-scoured ice to escape the swarms of mosquitoes that plague the Arctic tundra each summer. Where caribou gather, ancient hunters often followed, and where hunters followed, they sometimes left tools behind. At one plateau along the Atagun, severe erosion, driven in part by that same thawing permafrost, had exposed what looked like the remains of an ancient campsite. Sturry's team got lucky. Flint chips were already lying exposed on the surface, visible without any digging at all. Test excavations followed, and more artifacts came out of the thawing ground, fresh evidence of a hunting strategy stretching back generations, one now surfacing only because the ice that hid it is finally letting go. Discovery is only half of this story. The other half is decay, and it moves faster than most people expect. Once permafrost thaws, the organic material it protected does not simply sit there, slowly weakening over decades. It can collapse within a single season. Thomas McGovern, an archaeologist at Hunter College who has spent much of his career studying ancient sites in Greenland, has watched this happen firsthand. A few years ago, graduate students working with him returned to sites that had been documented as beautifully preserved, only to find the bone had turned, in his words, to mush. Anne Jensen is watching the same transformation unfold near Quinhagak. "We're losing the organics," she has said plainly, and that is a huge piece of what these sites have to offer. It is not an abstract concern. It is the specific, irreplaceable kind of evidence. Ancient diets, migration patterns, entire food webs reconstructed from preserved tissue and bone that simply cannot be recovered once it rots. Archaeologists in the region have taken to describing what is happening with a comparison that has stuck. It is, they say, like a library on fire. Except this fire burns invisibly, in the mud, out of sight, and by the time anyone notices the smoke, the pages are often already gone. The tragedy of this particular fire is that it does not destroy knowledge outright, so much as it destroys the chance to ever recover it. A collapsed building can be rebuilt from blueprints. A degraded bone, its DNA broken down, its structure turned to pulp, takes with it information that existed nowhere else on Earth. Alaska's permafrost had been quietly writing this library for thousands of years. The climate driving its thaw is now closing the book mid-sentence on chapters no one has finished reading yet. What is happening at Nunalleq, Walakpa, and the Brooks Range is not an isolated string of bad luck. It is a pattern playing out across the entire Arctic, at a scale that is difficult to fully absorb. In 2018, an international group of archaeologists, drawing on researchers and institutions from the United States, Canada, Denmark, Norway, Russia, and Scotland, published the first broad synthesis of how climate change is affecting archaeological sites across the far north. Combing through national cultural heritage databases, they identified at least 180,000 known archaeological sites scattered across the Arctic region. 180,000, each one a potential Nunalleq, a potential Walakpa, each sitting in ground that is thawing at 2 to 3 times the rate of the rest of the planet. Most of those sites will never be excavated in time. There are simply not enough archaeologists, not enough funding, not enough field seasons in a single human lifetime to reach even a fraction of them before the coastline or the thaw gets there first. In northern Alaska specifically, there is only one full-time archaeologist working the region's sites, a workload that would be daunting even without an active climate emergency accelerating the clock. The threats are not limited to erosion and organic decay either. In parts of the Russian Arctic, researchers have documented so-called ivory hunters using high-pressure water pumps to blast woolly mammoth tusks free from thawing permafrost, selling the ivory on the black market with little regard for the archaeological context they are destroying in the process. Closer to home in Alaska, locals and tourists walking increasingly exposed, eroding coastlines have also been known to pocket artifacts as they surface, unaware or unconcerned that each one removed without documentation erases a piece of the puzzle before scientists ever get the chance to read it. None of this is happening in a vacuum. disconnected from the people whose ancestors actually left these artifacts behind. For the Yupik community of Quinhagak and the Inupiat community around Utqiagvik, sites like Nunalleq and Walakpa are not abstract research opportunities. They are direct, physical links to ancestors whose lives were otherwise passed down only through oral tradition. That is why so much of the most important work happening at these sites is not driven by outside universities parachuting in, but by partnership with the people who live there. Anne Jensen works closely with the Utqiagvik Inupiat Corporation, and her research is shaped by Inupiat knowledge that has, time and again, proven more reliable than assumptions brought in from outside. She has learned to trust that knowledge even when it complicates her work, understanding that these communities are not merely stakeholders in the outcome, but the rightful stewards of what is found. That stewardship matters because the alternative, uncontrolled loss, benefits no one. When artifacts are pocketed by passing tourists or torn loose by storms and never recovered, the knowledge they carried is not transferred to anyone. It is simply gone, erased from both the scientific record and the community's own connection to its past. The race being run across Alaska right now is not really archaeologists against the clock, though it often looks that way in the moment. It is a shared effort between scientists and indigenous communities to capture as much as possible of a story that both sides recognize is running out of time to be told. What gets rescued in the coming years will likely be the last full chapters. What doesn't will fade quietly into the sea, ice, and mud with the people and lives it once described.
Thanks for watching this video, but before you go, don't let your DNA results just sit there unanswered. Tap the link on the description to download your ebook and find out what your raw data is hiding.